So what we see across all of this is that digitization standardizes a specific parameter around which new market interactions can now start happening, because of which we are now seeing a fundamental shift in the shape of business. And this is what I talk about in my work on platforms. Traditionally, we had thought of business, the way business worked in the industrial model was a very linear model of business, which I think of as a pipeline, where value is created upstream and it moves downstream. And as value moves down this, as an item moves down this pipeline, it keeps gathering more value until at the end it meets a customer who pays money in exchange for this value, and that's how the business worked end to end. All of the pipeline was closely coordinated and managed usually by one company, and any other companies who would participate on the basis of very strong contracts. So it was a very closely managed end-to-end chain. What we now see, because of digitization and because of the fact that digitization allows the coordination of multiple participants around a central business, is that we're seeing a new design of business, which is the platform design of business, where instead of seeing things in a straight line, what the firm does in the case of a platform is it creates an infrastructure over which external market participants, producers and consumers come on board and start interacting with each other. In order for this interaction to happen, it's important that the platform owner digitizes and owns the most critical market variable. So if it's a healthcare platform, the platform owner needs to own the patient data. That is what will bring other third parties on board so that the two can start interacting. We've seen many examples of platforms in the world of startups. We've seen Facebook, Google, Apple, and PayPal, a lot of the first generation platforms that have grown really big. We've seen Uber, Airbnb, and many other platforms of late which have grown really big. But what's really exciting is that this design of business is now becoming increasingly and even more relevant to traditional pipeline businesses who can exploit this single idea of digitizing something within their business and creating an ecosystem of external participants around that digitized variable. So when we think of the idea of a platform, fundamentally, a platform has two components. It has an infrastructure, it provides an infrastructure over which an external market comes on board and starts interacting. So a platform is essentially interactions enabled by infrastructure, which essentially implies that a platform needs to think about two things in particular. First, a platform should have an open architecture. If you do not have an open architecture, you cannot have external participants participate on the platform. And so the platform needs to have a mechanism by which it can allow external participants to come on board and connect onto the platform. Today, this idea of openness, of connecting onto a platform is very intuitive because of how digital technology in general connect us. But what's important over here is that whenever you're building something with an open architecture, you need to ask yourself, what am I opening and what am I keeping closed? Because every time you open something, your control point shifts. You need to have a new control point so that you can continue governing the system, which is where the second thing becomes important. With every open architecture, you need to have a mechanism to govern that particular architecture. You need to have a mechanism which determines who can get in, what are the factors that determine what kind of influence they have on the platform, how do you determine whether somebody is a trustworthy person or trustworthy party versus not, how do you determine whether a certain recommendation is relevant or not, what are the kinds of user journeys you lead them through so that they get increasing value over time from the platform. All of these factors come into the governance of the platform. And without the right governance, any platform model can collapse. We've seen this repeatedly where you take the example of a platform like Chat Relay, which was started by a Russian teenager, which anonymously allowed anyone to connect with anyone and start a video chat. And so you know what happened, because it was anonymous and because it was video, pretty soon it descended into a place where there were a lot of men who were not wearing many clothes. And everybody else who was not part of that category started leaving the platform till eventually the only people left were these guys. And so their platform did not go anywhere because they had open architecture, they had really open architecture, but they did not have any governance. So it's really important that when you're running a platform, you have to open it out for the ecosystem, for your external producers and consumers to come on board. But it's extremely important that every time you open something up, you figure out what is the new governance mechanisms we put in. And this is especially important for incumbents because this is something that may come naturally for an Instagram or the Snapchat. They may not even call this openness or governance. But you have a closed business model with which you've been making money over the last 100 years, and suddenly you start hearing all this talk about openness. It's important to understand that every time you open your platform, you need to rejig your whole governance mechanisms as well.